This book ended up being the most vanilla, stale book I have ever read in all of 2020. Perhaps ever. Today I'm going to be talking about all the books I read in the month of December while eating my favorite food, fried rice. They gave me a lot, so I might have to pace myself for this one. Before we start, I gotta say thank you to Squarespace for funding my fried rice addiction. They are the sponsor of this video, and they provide a platform for you to make gorgeous websites for anything that you could possibly want. Collecting donations, email campaigns, blogging, whatever you want, they have it all. They even have integrated analytics so that you can refine your email strategy with real-time campaign and website analytics from one source. And that way, it helps you learn more about your content so that you can have higher engagement and tracking metrics. You can head to squarespace.com to get a free trial, and whenever you're ready to launch, you can go to squarespace.com/readwithcindy to save 10% off of your first purchase of your first domain. So the first book that I read in December is called The Turn of the Key, which is a thriller book about a nanny who is currently in prison because there is a child in her care that died and she is accused of being the murderer, which I'm sensing is a very common theme among many domestic thrillers. They really hate nannies. It starts off with her in prison and she's writing a letter to a lawyer begging for him to take on her case because she swears that she is innocent and she had never murdered the child. And she's like, so you're probably wondering how I ended up in this funny little situation. Let me recount every single thing that happened leading up to this point, and that's how we dive into the story. You see, it all started when I came across an ad that seemed too good to be true, which again is another common theme for many thrillers. It was a job post for a nanny role that had an amazing salary, and so she decided to apply for it, and she got the job because they were super impressed by her resume, which I find super ironic because as you read throughout the story, you can tell that the main character doesn't even like children because she's constantly thinking about how tiring they are when they're basically acting like normal kids. Like, she starts the job and then the kids are acting bratty as most kids usually are, but then she acts like this is so emotionally draining and taking so much out of her, and she's like, man, I don't know if I can deal with such emotional turmoil of taking care of these monsters. And I'm like, bitch, aren't you supposed to be an expert of this shit? Like, weren't you trying to be Mary Poppins up in here? But the way that she describes the child, she fucking straight up hates the kid. So the whole time I'm reading the book, I'm just thinking about how terrible of a nanny that she is because she curses in front of the children. She almost smacks them at some point. There's even a scene where she doesn't even watch the kids and she goes off to do something stupid. So I'm just like, bitch, I mean, I get it with the distaste for children, but this is literally your job. So maybe get your shit together or else people are gonna think that you murdered the kid when they died later. What she also finds is that the house that she's staying in is very weird. It's considered to be a smart house because it has more advanced technology than most other houses. There are cameras installed around the house for constant surveillance, but then sometimes the technology malfunctions, so then all of a sudden there's like booming music in the house and she doesn't know why, or like the lights just turn off at the worst possible time. So it's super sketch. There's some Black Mirror shit going on, but the money's still good, so she's gotta stay anyway. Honestly, I didn't find the smart house to be that weird. What I found to be actually weird was the fact that the house has a poison garden in the backyard. Like, there's this one part where the mom gives her like a 60-page manual of the house, and there was just like one small section on one of the pages in the middle of the packet that mentioned the poison garden and that she shouldn't bring the kids in there. She doesn't read through the whole packet because she's like, bitch, I don't have time for that. I'm too busy complaining about your kids and being a terrible nanny. So later when the mom finds out that she and the kids went through the garden, the mom gets so pissed off because she's like, that was a poison garden. And I'm like, bitch, first of all, if you have something that dangerous at your house, why wouldn't you put it in like big red text at the front of the packet? Second of all, why the fuck do you have a poison garden? There is an explanation for it, but I still found that shit weird because she was just like, oh yes, we just happen to casually have a poison garden despite having a bunch of little kids, and we won't mention the poison garden at all, and it's just gonna be like a little footnote. I didn't know how to rate this book, so I ended up giving it 3.5 stars. Why I hesitate to think, oh, that was a great story, is because the buildup felt very, very slow, and many of the creepy things that happened, which is essentially just her hearing like weird noises scraping across the floor. Like, yeah, that's creepy, but then it happens over and over and over again, and then that just gets repetitive when she doesn't even like discover why that's going on till the very end. So if you're gonna keep the audience hanging till the very end, I feel like it needs to be something super juicy, which I don't really know if it was, but on the other hand, what I did like about the story was that there were a lot of red herrings and misleads. Like, it would make you think one way, but then it would turn out to reveal something totally had expected. I did see other people review this book and they weren't a fan of the red herrings, but I personally didn't mind it because I think it added to the whole surprise of it. I will say though, I totally called this big plot twist that gets revealed later in the story. I'm so proud of myself because I think this is like a plot twist where most people didn't catch it. I'm not gonna say what it is, but I felt like such a genius when I called it in the beginning of the story because the plot twist is not really dependent on the narrative. It's more dependent on how the writing is constructed. And so I was just proud of myself for that because whenever I read a book or I listen to an audiobook, I like to pay attention to the way that the author constructs their sentences. And that was how I was able to pick it up because I was like, wait a minute, why did she write in these specific ways? So I was like, I see what you're doing, Miss Ruth Ware. I'm on to you. And that was a pretty good twist, I must say. Usually when I pick up a twist early on, I'm just like, that was too obvious. But this one I thought was kind of clever. The next book that I read is another thriller called When No One's Watching. It stars the main character who was born and raised in Brooklyn, but her neighborhood is being gentrified because there's condos that are just sprouting everywhere. The neighbors that she knew are getting bought out or just had to leave because the place is just getting too expensive. You know, just New York things. The main guy is one of the neighbors that moves in. He volunteers to be the main girl's assistant because she decides to take on this initiative to do a walking tour of the neighborhood that gives more insight to the history and the culture of the Brooklyn that she knew, rather than this whitewashed, gentrified version of it. But as they deep dive into the history of the neighborhood, there are some weird patterns that they start to notice that develop this sense of paranoia and fear, and it develops this conspiracy theory about what is actually happening to the neighbors who have moved out from the neighborhood and go to the suburbs. They start to think maybe those neighbors didn't actually make it to the suburbs, even though before it seemed like they were adamant about staying in the neighborhood. But then all of a sudden they're like, oh, we don't mind if these white people move into our homes. We're just gonna go live a happy life in the suburbs. But where are they? Where the fuck did they go? Okay, I'm eating way too fast, so I'm gonna slow myself down. We'll save this for later. I was so into this idea. I loved the premise of the story, and I absolutely love it when thrillers incorporate social justice issues and real world issues into the thriller element of it because that just grounds it more into reality. The author's approach to this genre felt very unique because the first 1/3 or half of it felt more like a contemporary book. It even felt like a rom-com, which makes sense because Alyssa Cole is more known for her romance books. That juxtaposition of having like a setting that feels like a rom-com but is actually a thriller later on was a super interesting dynamic because the appeal of rom-coms and romance stories is that the characters are very likable. In thriller books, in my opinion, you don't really see that often. Like the characters are kind of forgettable in thrillers. They're just there to make bad decisions so that you can see them go into some scary situation. But this felt different because I actually really liked the main characters, and that made me simultaneously worried for their lives because I knew this was a thriller book and that some shit was gonna go down. So I'm just like, oh my god, this is such a cute couple, but wait, this is a thriller book, their lives are in danger. So the first half of the book actually felt like another book called Such a Fun Age, where it was contemporary fiction that dealt with a lot of racial commentary. The thriller component builds up throughout the story. It kicks in a little bit later on towards the end. But what I did feel like was that it didn't seem like much of a thriller. As it was building up, I kept on hoping for something crazier, but honestly, it just kind of felt like realistic fiction to me. Because if you're writing about the horrors of gentrification, is that really like a horror book or a thriller book, or is that just a realistic story? The main problem that I had with the story though is that even though the themes of gentrification are a great concept for a thriller, the bad guys in the book felt so cartoonish and overtly evil, when I think that a lot of racism today is insidious. And that's why it happens, because it's not so obvious. But the book makes it super obvious. For example, there's this random guy that pops up every now and then and tries to recruit the main guy into this job that is essentially trying to push out all the black people out of their houses. And he talks like this typical dude bro or like a crony or a sidekick for the big bad guy. And it's like, who just comes up to random people and talks like that? You don't just walk up to people and you're like, hey, you want to join my evil society? Like, no. I mean, I'm sure there are dumbasses who do that, but I wish that this book was more subtle. And overall, I feel like there was just a decline in the story past the halfway points. Even then, I didn't care about the characters at this point. point anymore, as they revealed their dramatic background stories, which I don't think were that dramatic. I kind of predicted it pretty early on. I got the sense that in the last 1/3 of the book, the author probably struggled writing it because all of a sudden, when the thriller part comes in, it just feels so fast-paced and rushed that it feels very jarring in comparison to all of the buildup that we had. And I feel like the author really boxed herself in because she set up this plot and this conflict that is so much bigger than what the two characters are capable of handling. How do you solve gentrification when you're literally just one person? That's a very hard task to do. I'm going with 3 stars for this one. I will say though that if this book does get picked up to be like a TV adaptation or a movie adaptation, I would still totally watch it. And then as a palate cleanser for these thrillers, I decided to pick up a romance called The Flat Share. This is a story about a girl who needs to find a cheap apartment really fast. She finds an ad that is advertising this weird concept of a flat share, where she would essentially be sharing this apartment with a stranger that she has never met before and that she will never meet for as long as she stays in the apartment, because the main guy works in a hospital, which means that he only works during the night and across weekends. So that means that during the day when the main girl is at work, he is staying at the apartment, and then when it's nighttime, he goes to work while she goes home from work and she gets to stay at the apartment. It's funny how a lot of times whenever you describe the synopsis of a romance story, it could easily be a thriller book as well. This is a book that I ended up rating 4 stars, but what's funny is that I was so ready to drop the book early on. There were 2 reasons for this. The first was that I couldn't buy into the premise at all because of the fact that they had to share a bed. They're not sleeping together, but I think it's weird to just share a bed in the first place, because what if the other person is unhygienic? Also, is the dude literally at work every single night and every single weekend? There's absolutely no way this arrangement will work. No one's schedule is so rigid that they wouldn't need their apartment during the daytime every day. No one would ever go for that. I mean, I don't know, maybe London is super expensive to live in, so they have to resort to this. Actually, you know, I could see this kind of shit being pulled off in New York or LA where the prices are like way too high, but that's more of an economical problem, and I still don't think that you should resort to that because that's fucking creepy. I need my privacy and I need to live in my own space that I can be in 24/7. Like, what if you're a depressed bitch like me who likes to take depression naps for over 16 hours? Obviously, I can't be doing that if I was in that kind of arrangement. Another thing that I didn't like about the book was the writing style for the main guy's chapters. He writes in very choppy sentences and it's just very awkward and rigid, and I think the author was trying to do that to differentiate the 2 voices of the characters and to further amplify how the main guy is a bit more practical and rigid with the way that he approaches life, but it didn't work for me. It made it very hard to get into the book at first. So I was buddy reading this with 2 people and I was on chapter 7 and I was like, hey, listen, I might just drop this book. I don't know if I'm feeling this. And then literally the next day, I texted them saying, hey, guess what? I'm on chapter 27 now. There was totally a flip when I read more of the story. I just started liking it a lot more when they finally got accustomed to living in the same flat and they started sharing notes to each other, which I thought was cute. Do I buy the fact that they would reveal such personal information so early on in the relationship in the notes? No, but for the sake of advancing the story, I understand that it must be done. But it's just sweet. Like, there's this one point early on where the main guy is thinking that he likes having her notes to go home to. And I'm like, aw, it's a good thing you're not a thriller book. Otherwise, this would be fucking creepy. What I liked the most about this story was that the conflicts that they were dealing individually were very serious and real things that people do deal with. So for example, the main girl is trying to heal from an emotionally abusive relationship, and the main guy has a brother who is in prison for a crime that he did not commit. There's a lot of angst and emotional turmoil when it comes to their individual conflicts, but the romance that they have with each other is so fluffy and wholesome, and it provides such a nice break to those serious matters that they are dealing with. And I really like relationships like that. I love romances where the characters go through serious problems, but their relationship is so pure and wholesome, because it makes me feel like love is a reprieve from how awful the world can be, and that shit makes me soft. They very much lived individual lives separated from each other, and they had their own thing going on and they had their own interests going on, and I think that's nice. I like that characters have their own lives outside from each other and they just come together to make each other better. The romance took over a very long period of time, and they had this solid foundation of friendship first when they were getting to know each other and just communicating with each other without really seeing each other first. It's not a perfect book, but it was just so cute and fluffy that I just had to rate it 4 stars. After that, I read another romance book called In a Holidays. This follows the story of a girl who is super close to her family, and every holiday they always go up to the cabins up in the mountains and spend their Christmas with another family that they've been friends with ever since she was little. The other family has 2 brothers who are around the same age as her. She is really close friends with the younger brother, but she has always had a crush on the older brother. When I first read it, I was like, bitch, is this the kissing booth? Not this shit again. Fortunately, it's not quite like the kissing booth, but also it wasn't that good either. The book starts off with her making a terrible mistake, which was hooking up with the younger brother. They also find out that the other family is gonna sell the cabin, which means that they're not gonna have their holiday trips anymore. So the trip is ending off on a bummer. As she is driving back home, she just thinks about how this shit sucks. And then suddenly there's a car crash, and then when she wakes up, she is back on the plane to go to the cabin. She finds out that she is stuck in a time loop where she is re-experiencing the week-long Christmas vacation that she had over and over again, thus providing an opportunity for her to correct her mistakes and possibly reveal her true feelings for the older brother. This book ended up being the most vanilla, stale book I have ever read in all of 2020. Perhaps ever. I'm not even against vanilla romances. I actually like them, but this particular romance was so vanilla to the point where it was so boring. Even the Christmas traditions or activities that the families do with each other are so vanilla. It's like they were pulled out of a white Hallmark Christmas movie. Like there's a part where they're exchanging gifts, and one of the gifts that they give to the dad is one of those prank gifts where you press a button and it sounds like someone is farting. This is the most stereotypical gift that you could give to a dad, and that literally only happens in Hallmark movies. So it's like you couldn't give any kind of creativity or personality to what that dad might even like. The families have a competition where they all team up to build a snowman, and the best snowman wins. And we spend a whole fucking chapter about that. And then someone throws a snowball instead of building a snowman, and they end up having a snowball fight, and the main character gets upset because that's not part of the tradition. And I'm just like, we get it, bitch. Your family is so functional that the only conflict you can have is the fact that you decided to make a snowball fight instead of building a snowman. The biggest flaw in the story, though, is that the time loop plot was entirely pointless. Like, it didn't do anything. The main character only repeats the same days for the first 1/3 of the book. And then the last 2/3 of the book is her continuing from the same timeline. So then it's like, why did we even have that whole time loop idea in the first place? The time loop was totally forgotten about for the rest of the story, which defeats the whole point. You might as well have made it a normal story without that added weird plot point of a time loop that never really gets explained. I feel like the authors only put it in there just so that it would add a little bit of flavor to their otherwise vanilla story. And then the third act conflict was so freaking stupid. I'm not even gonna bother saying what it is, but it's literally like the most stupidest thing that you could ever be mad about. And then they made up in such an easy way, where literally the way that they made up was just like, oh, I was just mad at you. That doesn't mean that we broke up. Like, then what the fuck was the point? Again, it just adds to the fact that the story is so vanilla that it can't even do proper tension correctly. Rated this 2 stars, not for me. After that, I read a contemporary book called This Close to Okay. This is a novel that covers a life-changing weekend between the 2 main characters, where the main girl is a therapist who is trying to move on from a divorce, and the main guy who she meets at a bridge because he is about to jump off the bridge, and she stops him. She convinces the guy to join her for a cup of coffee, and he eventually agrees to come to her house because she is just so desperate to make sure that he doesn't, you know, hit the bucket. The whole book covers the weekend that they have together. It also slowly starts to reveal the secrets that they have. The majority of the book is essentially just very emotionally charged conversations that they have with each other as they get to know each other better. I picked this up because I really like stories about 2 strangers coming together to help each other heal and form this unique connection connection through their journey. That's why I liked the flat share. But while I do think that the writing in this book was lovely, I think the ending could have been way stronger if it were executed differently. And I also wasn't really a fan of the dialogue. Again, most of the story is them having those emotionally charged conversations, but a lot of times it felt like a very personal Q&A where like these two strangers are just hanging out and then the main girl is just like, what's your deepest fear? And then he answers and he's like, what's your deepest fear? And it's like, and then they just go back and forth with each other. And it's like, yeah, you know, this is a great way to cut the small talk and really dive deep into things. But it was so obvious that this was a very easy way for the characters to learn intimate details with each other very quickly and very easily. It reminds me of this Instagram account and this card game called We're Not Really Strangers, where they encourage you to ask super personal questions about each other, and it's supposed to be super emotionally poignant and make you all reflective and emo. So I think if you are into that Instagram account, you would really like this book. I didn't quite buy it, and so that's why I'm rating this 3 stars. And then the last book that I read is The Wife Upstairs. This is a modern day retelling of Jane Eyre, where the main character, Jane, works as a dog walker for a rich neighborhood. And what these Karens do not know is that she is somewhat of a grifter. She actually will steal some of the items in their houses because she is a broke bitch who has no morals. The story begins when she meets the main guy, who we know from the original story as Mr. Rochester. He is recently widowed because his wife had drowned in a boating accident with one of her best friends. So Jane sees him as an opportunity because she's like, ooh, rich, brooding, handsome, and doesn't have a wife because she dead? Cha-ching! They instantly fall for each other. Jane is gonna live her dreams of having that rags to riches story. But as you can tell from the title of the book and the original Jane Eyre that the story is based on, perhaps the wife is not quite out of the picture. I'm gonna keep this short because I don't really have much thoughts about this story. I rated it 3 stars because I found it to be a very quick and easy read. Like, I read this in one day, but I found a lot of the story to be very predictable. As someone who is already familiar with the Jane Eyre story, I pretty much knew exactly what was gonna happen. So I wish that the author added new things. I mean, she did, but even like the new twists that the author added were easy to guess because you already had the context of Jane Eyre, so you can kind of fit the pieces together. There wasn't really anything surprising to me. Just kidding, I lied. The last book I ended up reading was The Perfect Nanny. This is a book that was originally written in French and it won a bunch of awards, and so it got translated to English. It is about a mother who returns back to work as a lawyer, and so she hires a nanny to look after her kid. As you can tell from the title, the nanny is perfect for them. She sings to the children, she cleans the apartment, she stays late whenever she is asked. There's really no complaint you can make about her except for the fact that she ends up killing the kids, which you find out literally in the first page. Again, this is becoming a very common trend in books where nannies cannot be trusted. Now, this is marked as a thriller book, and even compared to Gone Girl, that is absolutely not true. It's not similar to Gone Girl at all. I wouldn't categorize this as a thriller because it's very much a slow burn. I would categorize this more as a character study. It's really more focused on the buildup between the nanny and the family that she's taking care of and how they become very codependent and obsessed with each other. But nothing crazy happens from that other than the kids being dead. I liked the atmospheric writing, and I normally like character studies, but this book didn't quite hit it for me. I found it difficult to stay interested because there weren't really any answers provided. Even the ending was very enigmatic in a way that didn't feel satisfying. I really started off this book with high hopes because I was very interested in the commentary of immigrants and how they are often the ones in the roles of the caretakers. The author is Moroccan and the mother is Moroccan as well. Early on, there is a part where she is interviewing all these nannies and she immediately does not consider any of the Moroccan immigrants that have applied. She doesn't want any of these immigrants to think that they have like a better chance with her because she happens to be Moroccan as well. So she draws a line between like, oh, I'm not like them. There's a line where it says the mother has always been wary of immigrant solidarity. And when I read that, I was like, bitch, what? It's the internalized racism for me. But I thought this was going down an interesting route because there are a lot of immigrants and kids of immigrants who who do not want to speak their native language or even want to be associated with it. And since the author is French Moroccan, I thought there would be more of a commentary on how France has a tendency to have xenophobia, specifically with Muslims. And since Arabic is a common language associated with that, it's often dangerous for people to speak Arabic out in the open due to hate crimes. So there were a lot of mentions about being an immigrant and being a Moroccan in the beginning of the book that I was really interested in, and I thought that we would see more of, and I thought this was going to be like the central theme of the book. I was disappointed that we didn't really get more of that, and I think if we had, it could have been a more powerful story. But since we didn't, I ended up rating this 3 stars because I just thought it was okay. That is pretty much it for all the books I read in the month of December. Go ahead and unsubscribe from my channel, and goodbye. My goals beside my mental state while you left it to operate any further.